Okay, well, welcome back. Those of you who have ventured to return after a whirlwind morning. Maybe I can begin by saying that, all of what I'm talking about here is really all about spirituality, but a type of spirituality that is consonant with the world as we know it, and therefore one that is enlivening us in the 21st century. So that we do not fall into kind of spiritual vacuums or spiritual closets. We want a vital relationship with a dynamic being of God who is at work in this world. So that takes us through a long detour, so to speak. It's not really a detour, it's actually the main route. It's probably Route 80, cutting right through the universe. But I want to talk this afternoon about two things. One is mindfulness and consciousness. And, we can talk about mind, and today we live in an age which is becoming more and more oriented toward yoga, meditation, slowing down. We feel this need, to center ourselves. But the fact of the matter is, the one thing that has really co-opted, it's really taken over our lives in a good way for the most part, but in a way sometimes we have been inattentive to, and that's technology. And so, the saying that I mentioned before from the Gospels, where your mind is, paraphrase, where your mind is, there your treasure lies. And that is the question for us today. On any given day, where are our minds? Because most of our waking hours are spent in front of a screen, some type of screen, either a handheld device or a computer screen. So we spend a lot of our waking hours with artificial lighting and virtual reality. And the thing is that we like these devices. Truthfully, I love my phone, quite honestly. I don't love it in the same way I love a person, but we feel attached to them. And today my undergrads would tell me, like, a day without their phone, they kind of lose their own identity, right? I can't live without my phone. It's who I am. So we're moving into a kind of understanding with technology where it's beginning to identify us, what we are by nature. We're beginning to build technologies, as if you saw the movie Her, which is kind of an interesting film, where we have operative technologies. Alexa and Siri now are type of robotic technologies that can respond to us in a way that in the past we might have had a human person there. So poor Theodore here in the movie Her had a failed marriage and came across this really cool operating system, and he bought it and he fell in love with Samantha. And to the point where the operating system awakens him to a new sense of life and to what life's about. Then he's disappointed in the end to find out his operating system has about 650 other Theodores around. We're not so special with our operating systems. So, Sherry Turkle has written a book called Alone Together. And why this is important to talk about technology is because we are not only cyborgs with our devices. And a cyborg today can be anything from wearing eyeglasses or hearing implants or knee implants or pacemakers. Any kind of device that enhances biological life can be considered a cyborg life. But we are in the process of cyborgization. So we are being continuously cyborgized by our technologies. Now, what's interesting is not only do these machines, as we go from the use of machines to self-born technology to bio-integrated technology, for example, if you have a pig liver or a pig heart or, a lamb spleen or whatever it is, where we're using animal and human life now sort of integrated. All of this fusion of biology and non-biological life or technological non-human life is considered cyborg life. And for the most part, it is good. In many ways, it's enhancing life. Now, the thing about technology is we create the technology. So we are, in a sense, creating things that are recreating us. That's the important point here. And the question is, why are we creating what we're creating? Why are we driven by our technological dreams? I think that's the more interesting question. Not so much that we can do these things, which is incredible in itself, but we do them with particular points in mind. Catherine Hales, in her book, How We Became Posthuman, claims that we are moving towards a new post-human condition. So we're moving beyond, in a sense, Homo sapiens species, and we're moving into something new. And I think it is important for us to recognize that. In her view, she says, in the post-human, there are no essential differences or demarcations between bodily existence and computer simulation, cybernetic mechanism and biological organism, robot technology and human goals. So she asks, is the age of the human coming to a close? You know, will we be with the dinosaurs eventually in the Museum of American History or Natural History? You know, they'll be like, there's Australopithecus, there's Neanderthalis, there's Homo sapien, and now here's Cyber sapien. You know, here's Techno sapien. So we are becoming, the point for us is we are becoming something. And the question is, what are we becoming? Technology, I mean, if you look at what's happening at Google and the research, they envision life in the 21st century in a radically different way. They envision that we will have ways to mimic our intelligence, brain download ourselves, use new bodily simulations, and we relegate all that because we think, well, that has nothing to do with me. That's just something that's, you know, to the take-it geeks. But guess what? That stuff gets into Best Buy, and we buy it, and we're changed by it. And therefore, we need to ask, you know, what's happening with us with technology? When you walk across the college campus, not so bad here, actually. I see kids like are actually talking to one another, and that's really great. That's a sign of belonging to Homo sapiens, you know. But Sherry Turkle, in her book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from One Another, More from Our Technologies, and Less from One Another. That's the subtitle. We expect more from our technology. She says, technology makes it easy to communicate when we wish and to disengage at will. It is sort of the highlight of Western modernity, control and power. You know, touch of the button, it's all ours. She says, once we remove ourselves from the flow of physical, messy, untidy life, we become less willing to get out there and take a chance. And it's not, therefore, unreasonable that despite all our modern advances in technology, we are more fearful today, perhaps than ever before, of what's going to happen to us. We are becoming, in a sense, less willing to take chance because we're so used to the control of our devices. And as one pop song said, if you think I'm not the one, log off, and we'll be done. Relationships are built and they're broken, in a sense, with text messages, you know, or Instagrams. So we are, in a sense, developing a world of impersonal relations and impersonal emotions. And it's an odd thing. I can go on Facebook and I can have 700 friends, you know, and I can look at what everyone's doing. And my students tell me they construct their profiles, you know, online. Very interesting. They can spend hours constructing their profiles online. But when you talk about church or religion, it's like, huh? You know, like prayer? Well, maybe. But what scientists and what scholars are pointing to is that this constant computer use is leading to things like impatience. We're becoming less tolerable of things that take longer time. Forgetfulness. Now, these studies have shown that our memory cortices are thinning out. In the past, we used to try to recall, or we might ask another human person, do you remember the name of this book or the name of this movie? Now we Google everything, or we have Wikipedia. We have impulsive behavior. We have a type of narcissism. Since, and I always quip about this, the iPhone is, in a sense, a new iPhone, a new anthropocentrism, where the whole of my well-being centers around my device. We also have what some are calling oblivitron. I'm texting or, you know, reading emails as I'm walking across streets, as I'm driving cars, as I'm riding bicycles. People are, you know, driving into trees, getting hit by cars. And the most interesting thing, and these are studies that show, loneliness is actually on the rise. So we are more connected and we are more lonely than ever before. Because I can stay in my room. I never have to leave. and I can tweet, I can Instagram, I can Snapchat, I can do whatever. I can be in touch with everyone and be in touch with no one at the same time. So in a sense, we are in the process of making one another disappear by living more of our lives apart from one another and in the company of machines. And this is sort of this is a typical scene today, where everyone is sort of has their face in a device. Some people call this a digital dualism. That in a sense, my mind is here, my mind is here and my body is here. So we have the real-time space body, but the mind is in all sorts of worlds. And we can go into whatever world we want, right? Which means that you can go to a meeting and it looks like you're there, but you're not there, right? See, Marge knows you're not there. You're there bodily. But if you don't want to be at that meeting, you check out. You check your calendars, you check your email, you check whatever's going on Facebook. But this type of lack of presence is actually impacting our levels of consciousness. And so what Margaret Wertheim points out, she says she has done a fabulous study. If you want to read a really interesting book, it's called The Pearly Gates of Cyberspace. And Wertheim does a very nice study on how space is really extremely important to how we orient our lives. And for the medievalists, there was a space beyond Earth, that we called heaven. And that was the space where the soul could stretch. Then, she says, modern science began to conquer various spaces. We sent rockets into space, and we could measure that. We measured the space of the living cell. And she said we sort of began to run out of space where we could stretch the soul. But now we discovered and we invented cyberspace. So she says cyberspace is the new space of transcendence. In a sense, what she is saying is that cyberspace fills a void left by religion in the culture. So we're finding, in a sense, our religious transcendence now in cyberspace. And that's what she says here. It fills the psychological religious void in modern life. Now, just to get a sense of where things are going, Ray Kurzweil, that fabulous inventor who's at Google, claims that in about 30 years or so, we will become so wedded with our technologies that they, in a sense, will be thinking for us. We will exit this Homo sapiens and we will be in a new realm. So he calls this type of brain downloading, where we will be able to overcome the death barrier by downloading our brains into chips and replanting them in new mediums. Martine Rothblatt has developed a whole new vocabulary for this. Mind clones, mind files, mindware. So, you have your credit card today, you probably have your mind file card in the future. If you have any kind of condition that may lead towards Alzheimer's or dementia, we'll be able to fix the card, correct it and reprogram you, and you'll be good to go. And you think to yourself, this is really crazy. This is sci-fi stuff. But the fact is, this is probably more of our reality on the horizon. And so what transhumanism is a movement that has grown up around technology. It's both a cultural and a philosophical movement that sees that technology can usher in the next level of human evolution in a way where we will be able to overcome a lot of the things that prevent us from being, say, more unified or more just or more peaceful. So transhumanists, and if you want to Google this, you can really get a good sense of things. H+ is their logos. What they do feel is that technology fulfills what religion promises. A lot, and this is not just an idea, there are a lot of studies to show that Western technology is based actually on Western tenets of Christianity. The two main tenets being salvation and immortality. Christianity says that we will be saved and that we will overcome death, in resurrected life. Technocrats say we can do this now. We can invent things that will save us. We can live longer. Eventually we won't die. We'll just kind of replant ourselves, reclone ourselves. And you think, to what end? I think transhumanism doesn't have a big picture here. It doesn't have, you might say, the whole. of where we're going. But it is important to know that our our culture right now is in this direction, because religion and spirituality is still so privatized and marginalized from the culture. It doesn't really make an impact on where we're going. And so I think it is important for us to get back to the fact that what science is telling us, especially from the point, I think, of quantum physics, is that consciousness, in a sense, shapes what matter becomes. That's what quantum physics says. When I am mindful and I am aware of the possibilities and I make a determination, then my conscious decision, in a sense, determines what that event is. And so there is, therefore, a relationship between consciousness and matter. And I would even go far to say there's a relationship between consciousness and space. Certainly what Teilhard saw is there's a relationship between consciousness and love. All of this to say is, if we continue to live with partial consciousness, with consciousness that's isolated from the whole, we then are creating the downward spiral in our world. There is no world out there, in a sense, that's not here, that we're creating. So I want to come back then, and in the last part, I'm going to just focus on this. I want to come back to what Teilhard recognized early on, that this evolutionary movement is not just an outer evolution, that it is being driven by an inwardness, what we might call consciousness, or the religious dimension of materiality. So what he is saying is that the inner drives the outer. That's the important point here. And therefore, Teilhard calls us back to the essential role of mysticism in the evolution of life. Now, here's what he, in his own words, he says, the more humankind becomes conscious of the immensity and even more of the organicity of the world around it, the more the necessity for a soul to make itself felt. And by soul, he means here that inner universe, that ground of consciousness, that place of personal identity where we meet God in a deep personal way. So I want to maybe bring in how the mystics, I think, are the evolvers. Ken Wilber had a fabulous saying one time where he said something to the effect like, the mystics are the growing tip of evolution because they're already living on a different level of consciousness. In a sense, that is what we are being invited into. Now here we have the Buddha, Siddhartha, and I have to throw in Francis of Assisi. Both of them, here's two things about them. They both made radical decisions for their lives. Siddhartha was married, and he felt this deep call to enlightenment and left everything. Francis was a party boy growing up in a middle-class household and felt that deep love of God within him and made a radical turn. Now, in religious circles, we've known this for years. If you want to follow Christ, you need to take up your cross and follow Christ. But we have this language. But what we have sort of marginalized or sort of placated is the radicality of the life itself. In other words, this deep turning toward a deeper level of consciousness requires deep, deep radical decisions. It's not just something I can practice for an hour or, I think this is a great idea. Let's try it. I want to say this. I mean, what we begin to realize in evolution today is that we're not finished products. And I think the mystics know this so well. We're not over and done with. Beatrice Brutto, she just so insightfully said that the ego, is God's creative activity. It is not something in the past or something that is over and done with. It is God's acting and God's loving in the present moment. The I that exists is the I am, so to speak. In other words, God's being and my being now are in this matrix of creative love. So she says the I is the now of God's creative love. And that's, in a sense, what I see with both Francis of Assisi and Siddhartha and many others, that there is no way to really come to a new level of personhood without some radical decision making. And the first thing to do is, when we say meditation, it means really focusing our minds on love, peace, God. In other words, really training the brain. And here's what I see about the mystics. They train the brain for higher levels of consciousness. We know the brain can change. Much of neuroscience today is pointing to neuroplasticity. But we have sort of fast food brains, you know. We have sort of flabby brains. It's amazing because we work out the body, but we don't work out the brain. We don't work out the mind. But that's what the mystical quest is about. We need sort of soul training gyms, you know, not just body gyms. We need places of devoted attention to deepening, you might say, this holism of the brain. If I think of Francis of Assisi, you cannot count the cost nor the hours. And we have created lives where we count the hours on everything. And as we said before, we're controlling our time. And that's just the opposite of what we are being invited into. How do we begin to live in a culture where time is not, you know, determining us, but we can, in a sense, live in the eternal flow of whatever the present moment holds for us? It also calls for focusing, and that requires training the brain. I think of someone like Tenzin Palmo, the British Buddhist nun, who felt called to a more serious life of meditation, moved to Tibet, and then felt called to live in a cave 13,000 feet above sea level in a 6x6 cave. Not for an hour, not for a day retreat, for 6 years. Now, we're talking 20th century. We're talking in the 80s and 90s. We're not talking like, you know, 100,000 years ago. In other words, it's so outrageous, right? Are you kidding? Move to Tibet, up into a mountain, where a place where I can't even lie down, and I'm going to do this for how long? That's the type. See, the thing is that the mind has an expansive capacity. We have not even tapped into the realms of consciousness. We are selling ourselves out short, big time, thinking that we need technology to now, I love technology, that's not the point. But we keep relying more and more on it because we have lost sense of the soul, we have lost sight of the interior capacity for transformed consciousness. But we know today that a brain that's focused on prayer, on meditation, can change. And it changes us physiologically. I mean, blood flow slows down, we have higher levels of integration, etc. So the term that's used today is neurochoice. You know, we need to, in a sense, train ourselves, which is what meditation's about, for neurochoice. Psychologists have known about this for quite a while, what Ken Wilber and Stanley Graff call, you know, transpersonal evolution. As Wilber says, the mystics discovered the higher levels of being through an expansion and evolution of their own consciousness. And that, I think, is where, if I were to say, let me just back up and say this. We in the West have become big problem solvers. We're like, you know, we need to solve the problem of poverty, the problem of injustice, the problem of suffering. But the fact is, these problems have arisen in some ways because of the way we're living and the way we're living in relation to one another. We have sort of partial minds, partial consciousness. One of the things I'm, you know, maybe opting for is that, you know, a deep transformation of consciousness, as Wilbur is saying, from subconsciousness of matter and body to self-consciousness of mind and ego to a superconsciousness can not only change us, but as we're changed, the world around us is changed as well. I think if I can just take Francis of Assisi just as an example, because I know him best. Francis, we see him and the struggles of transforming consciousness. It's not therapy. It is rather a commitment to, in a sense, enter into those deeper levels, you know, in the search for God. And as he prayed, long hours of prayer, not like an hour of prayer. I mean, he went for weeks and months. And always people say, well, I have to work. I can't do that. That's always what I have to hear. And I understand that. But we have to find a way of opening up and nurturing that inner universe, even as we try to keep going in this very busy world. As his world opened up, what was, in a sense, despicable to Francis, what he rejected, he began to see himself related to, which would be the poor, the lepers, those who were left out. By the end of his life, he was blind, he had glaucoma, he had leprosy himself, he had gastrointestinal disease, he was a physical wreck. But out of that deeply transformed life, he saw and he sang that canticle of Brother Sun. He saw Christ throughout the entirety of this universe, which means that as our minds change, so does our vision. We begin to see the world out of a new center. So I do think we need to find a new openness. The key to moving forward is moving inward. And it seems, in a sense, that so many have gone before us, but it's the part that in the West, we are having a difficult time because we've become so good at left brain things. We have a left brain world that's right brain starved, so to speak. And the other thing I think we did is we cut ourselves off from the East. We said the East doesn't know anything. The East, they're pagan. The East, they're just not sophisticated. And we claimed a superiority, and that has been to our detriment. So I do think, we can learn from the East has, in a sense, plowed those fields of consciousness in a way we have yet to. But 3 things: silence, solitude, surrender. And that doesn't mean you have to go on retreat every week. It means learning to have silence within. In other words, how do we calm the storms within ourselves? If there is violence in the world, we can rest assured that violence begins within us. We have to disarm the heart if we are to disarm the world. And therefore, what are those practices? How will we, in a sense, find a way to pray even as we're going about our daily business? Solitude is not just being alone, it's being alone with God. It's knowing that the I is not a single I without a thou. It's living sort of in that trust that there is an other with me at the heart of this life. And therefore, surrender is, in a sense, flowing into that other, allowing that other to be, in a sense, my other in this going about the daily world of stuff. So, what we're learning today from neuroscience, but also from quantum physics and what the East has known for so long, our minds create the world and not the other way around. And this is what I think quantum physics is also beginning to show us. This is what a Big Bang universe, in a sense, is showing us, that there's no such thing as space. Space is being created, so to speak. And in fact, I would go so far to say, as a lot of our problems are spatial problems. We have spatial differences. In other words, when you come to a higher level of consciousness and you recognize the God in me is the God in you, then there's that space between us is overcome by a consciousness of unity. So our space, our separations of, me versus you, or me versus world, is because I have, in a sense, a partial mind. I'm only looking at this world in a half-conscious way. So I think we need to recognize that we are on our way to personhood. We are not really fully human person. I think, again, I want to say, I love science, it's great, but we buy too much into science without stepping back and recognizing that science will not solve our problems. It will discover a lot of things, but only we can become something new, if we are to have a new world. And I think, therefore, it's recognizing that God's love is at the heart of nature, in a sense, pulling it towards an ever greater oneness. And therefore, we are called to on the journey from a lower consciousness to a higher consciousness, more integrated. And we almost need new language, we need new paradigms, and we need new practices, in this journey towards more unified consciousness. And it's everything from going to a meeting. And, here's where I would say maybe the old-fashioned things of religious life may not have been, the agita contra. We give in to everything. Instead of sitting there going, oh, I can't stand being here, why not challenge yourself to be patient and to just remain there quietly without fighting everything? You see, we're constantly wanting to have it our way. And our way is a partial way. It's a way that's cut off. The only way to go forward is not only to go inward, it's to challenge ourselves to be doing what, in a sense, may be against what we want to do. So what Brutto says is the more conscious the individual becomes, the more then that individual becomes person. Because to be person is to live by the life of the whole. To be person is to be conscious of belonging to a whole. And that whole is the whole of where I am now, whether it's in my local family, my local community, my local church. That we can't keep going on with sort of partial warring minds. I say I'm part of a whole, but I really don't like the way she looks. I don't like the way she talks. I don't like, what she's saying. Well, you may not like it. You don't have to like everything. That's not the point. If we all like the same things, it would be a really, really boring world. So it's actually wonderful that we have different ways of seeing. And it's wonderful that we have different ways of understanding things. Our task is not to just be entrenched in our differences. Our task is to come to a new level of consciousness and to remain open that the God in you is the God in me, and that perhaps I can learn something by being open to you, and you can learn something from me. And so I do think we need something like a new contemplative engagement. Contemplation may be the new movement of our age, a oneing of mind, an inner-outer evolution. Google is really great on outer evolution. That's what Google does best. What we can contribute from the point of faith in evolution is inner evolution. And that means not only solitude, but unplugging. Cyber fasts, maybe take one day and unplug all technological devices. And here's a novel thing. Either go talk to another person or maybe even sit with a tree, Prayer, not just as saying prayers. Prayer is a deep dialogue with God. I mean, it's really, in a sense, living in that dialogue. Life is dialogical, and it's to be conscious of who we are in dialogue with. There's a wonderful saying about Francis of Assisi that said, Francis did not so much pray as he himself became a living prayer. Isn't that really, the thing? Not so much we're praying, but we become living prayer. That when people encounter us, they encounter something about us that lifts them up, that gives them a sense of peace, a sense of hope. And therefore, as Teilhard said, we need to harness the energies of love. Our energies are all over the place. Right? Where, we're wondering how we're going to survive here, how I'm going to do this, what am I going to do for my job, who loves me, who doesn't love me, and we're thinned out. We have thinned out minds, and we have thinned out hearts. And we have become what Nicholas Carr calls pancake people, spread wide and thin on any given Sunday. So, maybe what we're seeing here, and this is what the mystics can teach us, and why I think the mystics are really making a comeback today. We need to put mind back into matter, our matter. Put our minds into, are we mindful? Are we aware of our sense of self, of body, of our own uniqueness as person, of what we are becoming, as we go about each day, as we say hello to another person, or we fail to say hello? Do we train our brains like the Buddha? Are we able to really focus our brains on what we want? And what do we want? That really is the question. And that's really the big question. What do we want? What do we want personally? What do we want collectively? Do we want peace? Sometimes I wonder, do we really want do we want justice? Because if we want justice, that will cost us. We can't have it all. We can't have, the McMansions and, I'm living in 5,000 square feet by myself and still, try to alleviate poverty and have social justice. So the question is, what do we want? And can we train ourselves for what we want? So I think our 21st century is calling us to awaken the right brain, to think, to unify. If we had more time, we would talk about thinking, because Teilhard had a lot to say about thinking and evolution. Thinking is not information. We are information overloaded, right? We got information coming through every portal. You wake up in the morning, you have the newspaper, the television, your phone. You go to school or you go to work, there's more information. You come home and you're exhausted. You've been information doused. So what do you say? Don't talk to me. Okay, I've had enough. I just want to sit in front of the television and just become mesmerized. Thinking is actually having a space within. And as we encounter new ideas, as we encounter, different experiences, we take them in. We are attentive to that experience, and then we reflect on that experience. We ponder it, and then we form a judgment on it, and then we allow it to shape our action. That's contemplative knowing. It's also Lonergan. But, it's a way of, we have a way of emotionally reacting to the myriad news in our world today. And it's not helpful. It's actually debilitating us in our ability to make decisions and to go forward. So we're busy building a world without, but the world we desire must be first found within. As one person wrote, consciousness out of its own freedom is the source and power of everything. Where your mind is, there the rest of you will lie. And therefore, what we find with the mystics, and here is the beauty, if you look at a Hildegard of Bingen, or you look at a Julian of Norwich. Julian of Norwich lived, again, in a small cell for 40 years. Space is not space is what's unified when the mind is, in a sense, at home with itself and at home with God. So you can live in a closet, or you can live in a huge mansion. It doesn't matter. Because when our minds are attuned to God and we begin to see God within ourselves, within other persons, within the leaves and the trees, within the clouds and the rain, even in suffering sometimes, where we find love there, that outer world then is our inner world, and our inner world is our outer world, so that there's really one flow from outer to inner to outer. There's no dichotomy between here's my spiritual life and here's the world. So as Maria Rainer Rilke writes, through every being, single space extends, outer space within. But we come to that unified space when the God who is my creator is my redeemer and is also part of me. Or as Catherine of Siena said, my me is God. Or as Eckhart said, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. That's the great mystery. There is no I without a thou. Or as Simone Weil says, whoever says I lies. Even the wonderful Sufi mystic Mansur al-Hallaj said back in the 10th century, I saw my Lord with the eye of my heart and I said, who are you? And he said, yourself. I mean, the beauty and the nearness of divinity is never to be underestimated, but we have cut ourselves off from that reality. We have closed our minds to this incredible oneness at the heart of our lives. But if we can re-find it and reawaken to an inner strength, then when inner reality is stronger than outer reality, we can act from choice. We can begin to create our life and the world in which we're living. There is no world out there that we're inheriting. We are what the world is becoming. This is what Teilhard recognized. And he, was optimistic that if we can understand faith in evolution, we can then make the choice, empowered by that faith for love at the heart of the cosmos, that it can become more one in love. So, again, another great mystic of the 13th century, Angelo Foligno, said, "As we see, so we love." Seeing is a matter of consciousness. It's a mindfulness. Vision, the Gospels are all about vision. Jesus is constantly saying, what do you see? What do you see? What do you want to do? Do you want to see or do you don't want to see? Because as we see, we are seen. We're not doing the seeing, we're doing the encountering. To really see is to be taken in by what we behold. And if we can allow what we see to enter into our lives, then we can love what we see as well. That, I think, is in a sense what yesing the universe might begin with in the 21st century. And that's why maybe, your Marianist charism may not just be for you alone, in case you weren't sure about that. I think you have a fabulous charism that can really be very much attuned to this evolutionary flow. That what we are about, if we come to new levels of mindfulness, new levels of consciousness, and surrendering to this power of love at the heart of life, is a yesing to the whole universe. The whole universe is saying yes to this love, that this universe can become something more. It can become more unified in this Christ, in this love. So we might say our ongoing yes to God's love centers the universe in love. That's the part sometimes I think traditional spirituality has not gotten, that our yes is the whole universe's yes. And therefore, out of this yes, Christ is born. If the world does not know Christ, it's because there's something about us that has not yet birthed Christ. And people are often shocked by this. They're like, what? I thought Mary gave birth to Jesus. But hello, the body of Christ. It's not like, well, thank you very much. It's so nice of you to show up. The body of Christ now is your body. You're entangled, like it or not. You and Jesus are entangled. So, as St. Teresa said, Christ now has no body on earth but yours. No hands but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes with which Christ looks out on the world. You must go about doing good. You must be the peacemakers. So Bonaventure had this wonderful little treatise on giving birth to Jesus, giving birth to Christ. And once he says is, be receptive to God's love. Prayer, openness, don't shut down. Don't try to control God. And he calls that a kind of pregnation. Love can plant new seeds in us. And then he says, become conscious of those gifts. What is it that's growing within us? That's discernment. And then we need to name the gifts. Are we conscious? Do we name the gifts that are developing within us? Do we find ourselves having a sense of peace, a sense of compassion? And then sharing those gifts with others or giving birth. And therefore, as he says, adoring the new birth means all that I am, in my memory, intellect, and will, I offer to this world in how I go about the world. I may not always get it right. I may fall down. But I am, in a sense, harnessing the energies of love within me because that love now is entangled with Christ. This is the life of Christ, and this I offer to the universe. So Teilhard, if I come back to Teilhard, I'm going to wrap this up here. He says, as the mystic goes about the world, urging all things toward unity, because that's what the mystic does. The mystic sees on a different level. The mystic loves out of a deeper level. Mysticism is not some kind of, it's really the hiddenness. What we're talking about is the hiddenness of divinity at the heart of materiality. He says, as we see this divine impregnated in all things, we urge all things to unity, and therefore we contribute to evolution through this process of convergence. We see things bound in a web of love. What does that look like? What does it translate to? We have mystics all around us. they're seeing out of different ways. They're seeing out of different levels. I think of, if just, for common sake, someone like Oscar Romero. If I were to think of someone who began to see out of a different level. What he once said at the beginning, like, the poor people and I have nothing in common. I'm an archbishop, I'm on the higher rungs of the ladder. But what changed him? The love of his brother and the death of that brother opened his eyes. Where there is love, there is the capacity for new vision. And I think what we see in Oscar Romero is that transformative vision where he begins to see that his life and the life of the poor are bound together. And that pulls him on to new action. And that's what Teilhard said, is God exerts God's pull upon the universe through us as the evolutionary spearhead of the universe, because we have the greatest capacity to be pulled. We have the minds, we have the knowledge, so to speak, we have the openness. And therefore, we become the vanguard of the evolving universe. Could you imagine, here's just an imagination, could you imagine if we began to live, whether Christian life or Jewish life or Muslim life, along these lines, what kind of world we might see emerging up ahead? We continue to live almost as quasi-victims of some other system, that we just have to survive. We're all in survival mode. And Teilhard's saying, no, we are the evolvers. We are now the tip of what evolution's becoming. So far from escaping these structures of the world, we are called to refine these structures. As my friend Martin Laird said, through divinization, or allowing that love of God to shine through us, the mystic becomes a doorway through which Christ Omega enters and transforms this world in the divine milieu. That's Teilhard's great insight. The whole thing is divinity. We're living already within this immensity of divine love, but we don't see it, and therefore we don't act from it. This inner-outer transformation, I think, is the only way we can move to what Teilhard calls cosmic personalization. If the word Christogenesis seems too exclusive, then Teilhard uses the language of cosmic personalization, where he says it's not something in evolution, it is someone. We are becoming more personalized in evolution. And that, I think, is what we're resisting today. Because we are seeing the personalization through technology. I mean, we have never, up until now, known other cultures and traditions and language and religions in the way we do. But there are forces that are actually resisting that convergent process. And the only way, Teilhard says, we can cross that barrier of resistance is through inner transformation, because only inward transformation overcomes entropy. Anything else begins to dissipate. So that's what evolution's about, higher levels of consciousness despite the forces of resistance and the forces of entropy. Bouteau says something will explode if we persist in trying to squeeze into our old tumble-down huts the material and spiritual forces that are now on the scale of the world. And in a sense, this is what's happening, right? We're trying to put old wine into new wineskin. Where do we read that one before? And it ain't working. Something will explode. Again, as Teilhard says, competition, specialization, individualism must give way to a new collective spiritual energy as the prime energy of the world. Again, back to Bouteau, I'm going to wrap this up. She says an entire attitude, a mindset, a way of identifying self and others has to shift first before any talk of economic, political, and social arrangements can be made. She said anything else is premature, useless, and possibly dangerous. You see, what she is saying is very consonant with what Teilhard realized. If we are living only in the outer universe, and we are trying to solve the problems of this universe without attending to what drives this universe, which is consciousness and withinness, we will get nowhere. And in fact, it may actually get worse before it gets better. So we have to realize that the yes of our lives must start from within, from the deep center of the heart. We have to realize we evolve to never stop evolving. That is shifting our whole mindset to how we think about ourselves, how we wake up in the morning, how we go to work, how we live in our families and communities. Because life, what we know from nature, it is ceaselessly beginning. Nature has an incredible capacity to do new things because that's what God is, ever newness in love. Or as Brutto says, creativity may be seen as the real interior meaning of the act of faith. And this is what Jesus was trying to say too. When you have faith, when you believe, then you will be part of God's newness in love. You will be part of what this world has the capacity for. And so if we accept creation as ever new and we find ourselves as active participants in this ever new creating, then we are always facing the future. We keep trying to resist that future. We want sort of the now to stay, we want everything to stay as it is. We don't want it to get any worse. We'd like it to get a little bit better, but we certainly do not envision radical change. I'm going to for the sake of time, wrap this up. Basically, we need to expand our inner space so that as we meet one another, we are meeting one another on the cusp of the future each time. See, it's a shift in thinking about the way we think about ourselves. That every encounter, even a hello, is a creative act in the way we engage one another. So, several things. One is the best is yet to come. It's all before us and not behind us. Incompleteness is, in a sense, the name of the game. You know, life has this incredible capacity for openness and newness. I do think we need a much better sense of wonder and awe. We are too controlling. We are too defining of what is and what is not. That is not the way of the gospel. Jesus says, become like little children, because we know that little children live in that innocence of nature, in that wonder of nature, and therefore in the primacy of love. I think, we can say that Christ will unfold through us when we listen and are attentive to that Spirit who is creating anew. We are called to yes our lives into the creativity of God's love and not to fear. Do not fear, right? How many times we read that in the scriptures? Love drives out fear. So why do we fear? And what do we fear? But, as that wonderful Jewish writer, Eddie Hillesum, writing from a concentration camp in the age of 28 years old, recognized that we must open ourselves up because we're not alone. God is here. God is tenting, right? God is seeking to dwell with us. And she has this wonderful letter where she's writing to God, and she says, God, here, imagine writing from a concentration cell in a concentration camp surrounded by death and violence. She says, God, I realize you can't help us. We have to help you. Be you. And the only way we can do that, God, is by allowing you to come and dwell within us, to come here. Then she recognizes, she says, each of us moves things along in the direction of war every time we fail in love. She is writing and comes to a consciousness that she is part of the violence if she fails in love. And we must do the same. There is no war out there that does not have a seed here. The question is not how do we solve the war there? How do we solve the war here? What is it that keeps us, in a sense, in an armed resistance? Pedro Rupe, that wonderful Jesuit, said, what you are in love with, what seizes your imagination will affect everything. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. Because even Teilhard recognized that love alone can bring us to the threshold of another universe. We have this capacity, and love may be our greatest reality. And as St. John of the Cross said, in the evening of life, we shall be judged on love alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's green. It's green. We thought that we would take just a few minutes to have a little bit of a response to Sister, and we have arranged for a couple people to do that, and then after that we'll have, I think, a few remarks, and then we'll end with the 3 o'clock prayer. So first is Sue Sack, who is a farmer, and a chaplain at Good Samaritan Hospital here in Dayton. And she's a founding member of the Micah lay community, and she has a PhD in theology from the University of Dayton. And she has a book, amazingly enough, Teilhard in America, presently being published. So welcome, Sue.
Hi there. First of all, I want to say thank you, Ilia. That was wonderful, and I'm thinking, where do I even begin? I love to hear anything about my guy, Teilhard, that's for sure, and you did a wonderful job in presenting this on him. We thought, Bill and I, who's going to speak next, that we would just take a few moments and reflect on what this means for our own lives and our own experiences. So first, just a little bit about the idea of newness and creativity, and in regards to being a farmer. I have lived on a farm for almost 36 years, and it has been so formational for me. When I moved there, although I knew I loved the earth, I did not recognize how I was constantly going to be recreated as I created this place. We took an old farm that was in terrible shape and renovated it, basically is what happened. Well, I say we renovated it. We were there. We did the work. Someone else did a lot of the renovation. And that sense of that solitude, that sense of increasing oneness with the earth and seeing things constantly being remade, made new, has just been tremendous. The interconnectedness that we begin to feel with all around us. And I mean, not just the natural world, but since a lot of what we grow goes to local food pantries, also those people who are the clients at the food pantries. And as I became more involved with them, as Ilia said, and this knowledge that when you pick a flower, you affect the stars in the universe, that what we do really has effects on other people as well as on ourselves. To see how that community grew as we interacted with them led me not only into theology but into ministry. And now I am a chaplain at an inner city hospital here. And every day, full-time job when I work, I have interactions with 24 people whom I have never met before. And Teilhard talks about, and Ilia talked about, the withoutness, the giving out of love, and the connections that you find as you interact with people at that level. People come into the hospital, and we do want to be in control. We are such control freaks, and this is a time when you are not in control. You are broken. Those barriers have been smashed down, and for whatever reason you find yourself in this place where you are really dependent on those around you. You are dependent on God, and people know it. They really get that. And it is incredible to have conversations with people who are at that space, in that space, and to get the sense of God is so much there in that room with them. They may never have been churched, never stepped foot in a church, or don't anymore, or they may be very churched. It does not matter. They know at some level that this is crucial. God is there, and they need to connect with that, and they want to connect with me. So it is a real gift to be able to take that time with them and to see that sense of oneness with all these people. Does not matter race, creed, economic class, educational level, whatever, to see how very connected we are. And, you know, this is also a space, I was talking to a young woman who wants to be a physician's assistant, right, where you realize, okay, science really can't do everything. Because in that space, yeah, sure, it's about the medicine, but we also recognize there's a whole lot more healing that has to go on than just physical healing. It's about the emotional and the spiritual healing too. Okay? So the holistic sense of what has to happen in that space. Yeah. What Ilia said today also speaks to me as an educated Catholic woman who finds myself doing ministerial work that is outside the tradition. You know, I baptize people, I anoint people, I preach from across traditions, and it's very cool and very something else to see that happening in me. But also, again, to see it happening in the community that I interact with. There is something going on, as I think all of you have encountered in the world, where, as I said, people who have no regular interaction with church are coming to know God in other ways, through their families, through nature, through technology, right? And in a way I don't think we've seen before. It's transcending the churches, it's transcending the traditional religions, and I don't know where it's going, but I think it's pretty cool. And it'll be fascinating to see what direction that goes in the future. And finally, I also want to say some of these conversations I have with people, especially those who are at death's door, I'm so glad you talked about resurrection. You know, the whole question of, so what is that about? You know, what is heaven about? And how do we, what is the purpose of spirituality here? Why did Jesus come? Is it just about this delayed gratification at some point? No. And Teilhard was definitely about that, and trying to get us to see, very much to see in that new way, that the divine milieu is here. We are moving and working within it. So thank you for all of that. And now I'd like to call up Bill Hurt, who is also a UD graduate. He is a PhD microbiologist doing international lab audits, and he's an instructor building the global technical community. He's been involved in lay Marianist communities for over 50 years, and he was also at Ilia's weekend workshop in Arizona in 2014. So,
thank you, Sue. I want to add a couple of comments, and then we have some wrap-up and some other questions I know that you have as well. And I've got to say I've just been thrilled since November of 2014 when I was able to attend the workshop on artificial intelligence. Shared a lot of that with a number of you I know. And just the thrill is to understand that so many things in our current world and our future are having a spiritual foundation being developed by Ilia and many of her colleagues. And to me, that's very, very motivating. And I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts where my journey has gone since then, some of the seeds that were planted and the kind of thing it's taking. So for example, we are talking about interconnectedness on lots of levels and in many directions ever since then. One of the issues that has talked with, that I wanted to mention is even the connection that we would like to have as the foundation that we are encouraging in everyone of every faith is a foundation of virtues. And I wish in our political sphere there were more civic virtues being expressed, and then we have our spiritual virtues that we have. And I just wanted to focus today on the virtue of faith, which we take for granted, and many people, I make a distinction between the lowercase word faith and the capital F faith as a virtue. In lowercase, I think of faith as a belief and often a dogma that people feel is their driving force. And I don't espouse that. I like to think of faith as the virtue and a capital F, and the faith as a virtue is not a belief, it's a journey. And we are all on a journey, and we need to encourage each other's journey. The second aspect of it is it's a mystery. The wonder and awe is to me what is the virtue of faith. It's a journey and it's a mystery. It's not a belief and a locked-in dogma that's unchanging. A good friend up here in the audience, Kevin Hearn, was exposing us to Rob Bell and a number of his presentations, former mega church minister. But he expanded in listening to some of his presentations, an issue that I think relates to interconnectedness. And I think as a scientist, I like nerdy facts and details, and this 30-volume set, for example, is terrific of the human existence. And I think of what I learned a few years ago, where I understand that every person currently on Earth who's more than 2 years old has breathed some oxygen atoms that were breathed by Jesus Christ. Everyone on Earth older than 2 years old has breathed in some oxygen atoms on our planet. To me, that's staggering. And to think that all the carbon and silicon and sulfur and nitrogen around the world is being recycled constantly. You know, none of us lives more than 80, 90 years and so forth, and to dust we returned, and all of those atoms get reconstructed in somebody else. And it's transformed my thinking about reincarnation. I thought that was a strange mind game that, you know, some religions played and so forth, but it's a duh moment for me. We are all reconstructing ourselves, cells every day, every hour, and we're reconstructing ourselves, and the spirit in us, and hopefully the spirituality and the virtues of us is what's expanding. So I'm expanding, even picking up on a few little factoids and trying to develop the spiritual foundation. I just wanted to share those two things with you, and how a lot of it relates to interconnectedness, even on an atomic level, certainly an energy level, and building our spiritual base in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. If you want to entertain a few questions or comments.
Yeah, are there any questions or comments? You know, we've covered quite a bit today, so I just want to, yes? Mm-hmm. Yes.
How do you do that?
Well, that's an interesting question, and you know, it's been a part of my own journey, so to speak. I was trained as a scientist, so I was very much a control person. You know, I had everything mapped out. Everything was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it had on a certain timeline. You know, here, let me just put it this way. For me, it was remaining open to God in the changes in my own life when I didn't anticipate those changes. In other words, I even had my religious life mapped out. You know, I entered a Carmelite monastery. I was a Discalced Carmelite for 4 years. I was going to be like Thomas Merton and live all for Christ, you know. After 2 years in the garden and trying to dig out to the other side, I realized this may not be the life for me. So I became a Franciscan, and then I was sent to study, I thought, something I would never in a million years have chosen to study, and that was theology. And so one thing I think is important in the openness question is allowing God to be the center of your life through all the changes of life. That center is the unchangeable center of all change. And that even though when life happens, when things change, when you weren't looking in this direction, or you know, you weren't planning on it, it's instead of saying I've been thrown for a loop, all my plans are doomed, you know, it's a matter, let's go with the flow, because that means the Spirit is moving in a different direction. So maybe for me it has been, don't resist the change, but lean in. to borrow Sheryl Sandberg's term, lean into the Spirit, lean into love. And in that leaning into love, allow love to guide life. In other words, by controlling our lives, this is what I found in my own self, by controlling my life, I actually cut myself off at times, maybe from possibilities. Whereas if we can allow ourselves to lean into love, to know that God is there, faith is fundamental. Thank you, Bill. It is. I believe that I am not alone, that there is an other at the heart of my life. And leaning into that other allows me to explore life less as a mechanism and more like an adventure. So if I thought before that life had to be built like Legos, now I think life is like being at Six Flags. It's like being on the high coast roller coaster ride. You get in the cart and you're not sure how this ride is going to go. But we are called to live and enjoy it. And maybe the thing is, what I have found for my own self, by letting go and leaning into love, I have found a freedom, that I don't have to conform to everyone's expectations, even to my own expectations. And out of that freedom, I have found sort of the deeper beauty of life. I can meet people where they are, and I can find something that's beautiful in them, even though it may be different from what I have thought. And so what we are saying is that I think the key operative words are love, freedom, beauty, and the surrender. Those are, I think, key to the transforming of coming out of control, out of the need to manipulate, to define things, and allow life. It may take you into places you never dreamt of, and that's where God is, so. Yes?
Go back and hear the whole thing again.
Yeah.
On the walk back from lunch, I was thinking about how the insights that you have shared with us connect with our Marianist spirituality. Father Chaminade has already told us the essential is the interior. And as I began to process and integrate what I know of Chaminade and these revelations that you've given us, it brought me back again to just the brilliance of our founders and the French School of Spirituality. But particularly, I'm thinking about Marianist spirituality as being, of course, the heart of Marianist spirituality is based in the Bible.
Yeah.
And then if you look at aspects of our Marianist spirituality, Mary, mission, community, inclusion, and faith of the heart, I didn't have to expand my Marianist understanding of spirituality by all these new insights that you gave me. I'm challenged to fill my Marianist spirituality and look at each aspect of that in a more deep way.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to know what some other people in here think. I never thought of Father Chaminade particularly as a mystic, but I'm now thinking of him in another dimension. So I'd be interested in other people who know Chaminade better. I'd be interested in their insights if they think there's anything to that.
Great, thank you. And I think what you're pointing out, what these fabulous spiritual mentors were talking about and knew for so long, certainly the mystics go way back, right? And to all traditions, not just Christian. I mean, we have the Kabbalistic mystics, we have the Sufi mystics, Buddhism has its own perhaps brand. But we're saying when we tap into the deeper structures of reality, we're tapping into the deeper structures of consciousness, and out of there, they're seeing the world out of new eyes and out of a new center. So all that we're saying here is because Teilhard was French. And so this interior life that was so much part of French spirituality, now what he's saying is that interior life is not just only human life, it's the whole life of the universe, and we're part of that universe. And that's what he does. He makes that bridge between what we have known now into the wider cosmos, now through what science is telling us. We're part of a whole, and that whole has an interior that's seeking to become more whole. So it would be great to flesh out the Marianist charism in light now of evolution. I think that would be fabulous. So thank you. Yeah, and okay, let's go here and then here. Okay, back here.
So at lunch I was thinking
Yeah. A tree. Yeah, I know. Yes. Mind blowing, isn't it? Now, here's the thing, and this is a really important point because it ties in with the question, the concern on reincarnation. And that's the thing, two things here. Thomas Merton said, to be a saint is to be myself. Now, what we are saying is that self is not fixed. It's not a given. The self is God's creative activity. That's the whole point. That to be me is to be in that ongoing relationship with God. So the me-ness is constantly emerging in that divine reality as the more me. And what do we mean by that? That the immensity of God's love, the incredible incomprehensibility of God's love is that there is only one you. And there will never be another you. Your cells may die, your nitrogen and your oxygen and your carbon may flow into other lives, but the you that is you has been loved from all eternity and will endure in the heart of God for all eternity. And that is the incredible mystery of every single life. That no two lives are alike. That God does not sort of say, hey, well, that one's okay, but I think I'll just, fill in this one. That the beauty of you is precisely your thisness, your personality, the way you smile, the way you get angry, the way you get up in the morning. That's what God loves, and God is loving into a new future. And what we're asked to do is to love that which God is already loving. And out of that love is our holiness. That's where we find our freedom. Because you're right, if we're constantly comparing ourselves to what I am not, what she has and I don't have, or I could have been this, or I should have looked like this, then that's sin. Because we cut ourselves off from that God who is loving us. And we sin against our own selves by doing that. So the tremendous mystery is the beauty of our personhood, our own personality. And that is why, although I could understand the argument for reincarnation, I think from a Christian perspective, God's love is so incredible that there will never be another you in your core constitutive being for all eternity. That's our immensity out of the heart of God and into the future. And so we cannot get our heads around just how immense God's love is. But we can at least begin to tap into it by loving ourselves. One more question. Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, there's some really fabulous books now on this stuff. One's called The Unbearable Wholeness of Being. One's called Making All Things New. So here's what some people are doing. These are books I wrote, but read other books. Form small groups, right? So we can't do this alone. That's the one thing. This is a huge paradigm shift we're in. We are in a major paradigm shift right now. And what my small job is just awakening us to the shift that we're in. I think we need to share together. We need to be together in this emerging new life. So, and why I say take a book, take a chapter. Could be one of my books, John Haunt books, whoever it is that helps you with the new ideas. Take a chapter maybe once a month and just come together with some friends or some people you can talk about. Flesh out these ideas. They're not easy. I'm not expecting you to just get quantum physics and evolution and consciousness and all these huge things that even in science they haven't come to full agreement on. But what we can say is that these are new insights on nature. And now we're asking ourselves, what is God? God who is creator. What is God now inviting us to with these new understandings? So that's number one. I think form small groups of discussion that help break open these new ideas. Second, begin to practice, as Wendell Berry would say, practice resurrection, you know. Practice, you might say, evolutionary love. Practice the surrender as an open system. That means understand what it means to live in chaos when things are breaking down. Become attentive. How are you responding when things break down? Are you reacting? Are you closing up? Or can you, in a sense, pull back, allow a space to reflect on what's taking place, and then move into the flow of something new emerging? There are things to be done. And truthfully, we do need to continue precisely this. We need more literature, so to speak, more language, more ways of practicing an evolutionary faith. That to say that we are not victims of an unjust universe, we are lovers. We are co-beloved. We are co-creating this universe. And to come into a new consciousness of the power of our own minds and hearts to make something new. Okay, that's it.
We have a few housekeeping things.
Okay.
Did you want to say anything?
Do I want to say anything else? Good luck. I'm only kidding. There's a saying that I often use: when the level of our awareness changes, we start attracting a new reality. And I think that's what's happening. Our awareness, as we begin to share these ideas, our awareness changes. What is our new reality? And out of that reality, how do we love in new and deeper ways? For me, it comes down to love. And that's the truism, you know. In the evening of life, we shall be judged on love alone. Okay. Do you want to say something? Huh?
Sister,
Yes.
we
Yes,
have
Al.
a little token of our esteem for your presentation to remember us
Oh, thank you.
by.
That's
So,
beautiful.
Good, thank you. And give
Thank
her
you.
a huge round of applause.
Thank you.